My name is Mary Caldwell, and for nearly 3 years, I was the invisible engine powering the digital infrastructure of a mid-sized manufacturing company based in Cleveland, Ohio. My official title? IT Support Specialist 2. What that really meant was I built and maintained every system the company relied on to survive: internal databases, cloud backups, analytics dashboards, and real-time production monitoring tools. No one ever called me the architect. No one ever thanked me when servers stayed online through power surges or when emergency patches rolled out at 4 a.m. without a hiccup. But they always called me when something broke, and I always showed up. I wasn't the loud one in the meetings. I didn't gossip by the vending machine or laugh at our director's tone-deaf jokes. I kept to myself, worked long hours, missed holidays, and believed that eventually, hard work would speak louder than noise. That belief shattered the day my manager, Elliot Graves, cornered me outside the break room, coffee in hand, smirk on his face, and said loud enough for the entire marketing team to hear, "Do you think I'm running a charity here?" All I had done was ask, respectfully, for a modest raise, 10%, after 3 years of doing the job of an entire department on my own. I'd come prepared with documentation, server uptimes, client dashboard deployments, emergency recoveries. I'd been professional, thorough, reasonable, but he didn't read any of it. He just laughed. I stood there, blinking, my face flushed, my heart thudded in my chest. But I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just gave him a polite nod, like someone too stunned to react, and walked away. That's how this story begins. Not with drama, not with revenge, but with one sentence that stuck to my ribs like poison. And a quiet decision. I was done being their safety net. That night, I sat in my car long after the parking lot emptied, the rain blurring the windshield like tears I refused to let fall. Elliot's voice still echoed in my head. "Do you think I'm running a charity here?" And the way people chuckled nervously, as if my dignity was just another office joke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I started thinking, hard, because what Elliot didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the entire digital foundation they took for granted ran on one thing: me. My unpaid overtime, my undocumented fixes, my blind loyalty, and he had just thrown all of that away like it was worthless. So I made a decision. Not out of spite, out of clarity. If he thought I was replaceable, then I'd let him see what it looked like without me. I called the next few weeks my invisible exit. Each morning, I came in exactly on time. No more early bird troubleshooting or staying late to fix someone else's panic. I smiled. I joined meetings. I answered emails. But the spark was gone. And no one noticed. Behind the scenes, I began detaching. First, I retrieved my personal backups, scripts, configuration files, custom-built monitoring tools. Everything I'd poured years into that was stored on company drives. Quietly, I moved them to an encrypted external drive that never left my bag. Then I began to document for myself. Not for them. System maps, deployment routines, root access tokens, each detail carefully archived. Not to sabotage, just to reclaim what was mine. They had no centralized documentation, no succession plan, because for 3 years, I was the plan. One night, I stayed behind after everyone had left. The hum of fluorescent lights and server fans filled the air. I walked past the server room, past the messy whiteboard still scrawled with notes I'd written during an overnight crisis nobody remembered. At my desk, I opened a file I'd been curating quietly. The vault. Inside was everything. Encryption methods, API credentials, maintenance scripts, even the undocumented workaround I'd built during a firmware meltdown 6 months ago that saved the company from losing a $250,000 client. I didn't delete anything. I didn't corrupt a single file. But I started to shift control, changing permissions, archiving dependencies, removing my administrative footprints so cleanly no one even noticed they were missing. It wasn't revenge. It was preparation. Because I knew something they didn't, without me behind the curtain. Their system was a house of cards built on a windy cliff. 3 weeks passed. During that time, I became invisible. I stopped volunteering for last-minute client requests. I didn't fix bugs unless they were logged formally. I no longer jumped to save projects hanging by a thread. And nobody asked why. At first, everything ran fine. That was the brilliance of what I'd built, self-sustaining code. Smart logic that could survive, for a while. Just long enough to lull everyone into complacency. But then the slow unraveling began. It started with a tiny glitch in the internal dashboard, nothing major. Just incorrect timestamps on incoming order data. Then a delay in syncing supplier feeds. By the second week, the client reporting tool began exporting corrupted spreadsheets. They didn't connect the dots. Not yet. Then came Friday. I was sipping my second cup of coffee when I got a Slack ping. "Hey Mary, can you swing by HR at 11? Just a quick check-in." I knew what it was. I'd felt it coming. When I walked into the room, Elliot was already there, arms folded. Face unreadable. HR manager Jennifer looked pale and uncomfortable. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. "We've reviewed our team structure and, unfortunately, your position has been impacted as part of a strategic shift." Elliot added with a smirk. "We're moving toward a more agile culture. More collaborative. And, well, you've always been a bit of a lone wolf." Mary. Effective immediately. No handover. No transition plan. My access would be revoked within the hour. I didn't blink. I just smiled. Because what they didn't know was, I'd already logged out weeks ago. As I packed my things, I thought about how they used to call me at 1 a.m. when the server crashed. How they begged for help when client portals broke. How I'd saved them again and again, and never once got credit. Now they were sending me away like I was disposable. Like the systems would keep running without me. They wouldn't. The next morning, I did one last sweep, remotely, from home. No hacking, no sabotage, just clean disconnection. I removed the last remote logins. Deactivated my access to cloud dashboards. Cleared saved credentials. All legal, all ethical, just me reclaiming ownership of the work I built. Then I shut my laptop. Done. The following Tuesday, I received a message from a former coworker. "Hey, did you happen to leave the encryption key for the reporting tool somewhere? It's not working and no one can log in." I didn't answer. By Thursday, I got another. "The dashboard data's corrupted. Do you remember how the sync validation works?" Still nothing. I had done more than enough. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. And they were just beginning to feel the first tremors of a collapse they thought would never come. It started slowly. So slowly that no one panicked at first. By the second week after I left, I started hearing things through the grapevine. A friend in accounting texted me. "Is the finance tool down? Or is it just us?" A few hours later, someone from logistics emailed from a personal account. "Hi Mary, sorry to bother you, but we're having trouble pulling data from the supplier database. Did you leave any instructions?" I didn't reply, because I had tried to give instructions, for years. They just never cared enough to ask. Or listen. The dashboard I had built from scratch, the one no one documented. The one with 6 different API layers, all of it started behaving unpredictably. Graphs showed wrong metrics. Real-time data feeds lagged. Internal notifications stopped triggering. But the real kicker? They didn't know why. Because I was the only one who did. By the end of the third week, things escalated. The client portal went down, briefly. Just 15 minutes. But for a logistics company operating on tight delivery windows, 15 minutes was an eternity. Support tickets began piling up. Clients were asking questions. And still, leadership assured everyone, "It's just a hiccup." They weren't worried, yet, because on the surface, most of the systems were still running. But that's what made it worse. My code wasn't built to fail with fireworks, it was fragile brilliance. Held together by custom patches and undocumented solutions that I updated manually. Month after month, without me behind the curtain. They were running on borrowed time. And then, it happened. Thursday afternoon, 2:12 p.m. I was at a coffee shop, writing proposals for 2 potential clients. When my phone buzzed. 3 notifications in a row. Client dashboard completely blank. "Anyone else seeing this? Urgent. Reporting tool down company-wide. Can someone please explain why none of the encrypted backups are restoring?" I sipped my drink. Calm. They didn't know what was wrong. They were trying everything. Server restarts. rolling back updates, even digging through my old Slack threads. But there was one problem. They didn't have the source configuration files. They didn't have the encryption credentials for the client dashboards. They didn't even know where the real-time job schedulers were hosted, because I had built all of it during weekends. Under pressure, without support, and they never once asked for documentation. Why? Because they never thought they'd need it. By 4 p.m., the company's internal dashboard returned only blank white screens. By 5 p.m., the support inbox had over 400 complaints from clients. And by 6 p.m., the CTO, someone who once ignored me in elevators, was sending desperate messages to the engineering team. We need to stabilize the system ASAP. Where are the config backups? Who has admin access now? No one did. Not anymore. That night, I got a voicemail. It was Elliot. His voice sounded different. Not arrogant. Not smug. Shaky. Mary. Hey, listen. I know things didn't end well. But we could really use your help. We're experiencing, well, a total system failure. And no one can get into the architecture you built. If you could just give us a few minutes. Walk us through things. We'll pay you. Just, please. He paused like he was waiting for forgiveness to pour out of the receiver. It didn't. I listened to it twice. Not out of pettiness. Out of disbelief. This was the same man who had humiliated me in front of my colleagues. Laughed at my request for a raise. And discarded my years of work like I was a piece of office furniture gathering dust. Now he wanted me back, not as an employee, not even as a peer, but as a last resort. And that was when I realized, they still didn't understand what they had lost. The next morning, I checked their website. It was offline. I checked their LinkedIn page. Flooded with complaints. A client had publicly tagged them. We've lost 7 days of reporting. No updates. No explanation. Who's accountable? The silence that followed was deafening. Internally, the company was in chaos. A friend still on the inside told me. 3 senior engineers had resigned in the past week. The head of sales was threatening to quit unless client confidence was restored. 2 major clients had suspended contracts and were consulting with legal teams. The systems weren't crashing. They were rotting from within. Misaligned schemas. Broken job queues. Missing validation layers. Each problem triggered another. Death by 1,000 neglected details. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. I hadn't touched a line of code. I didn't need to. The neglect was doing all the work for me. Then came the final call. Friday. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Mary, I know I didn't treat you the way I should've. I get that now. Please, just help us stabilize. 1 hour. That's all we're asking. We'll pay anything you want. Just tell us how to fix this. No arrogance. No deflection. Just panic. But it was too late. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted them to fail. But because they never listened when I tried to help. They only saw my value when it was gone. And now the foundation was crumbling beneath them. All I had to do was watch the dust settle. In the days that followed the collapse, the messages didn't stop. Emails, voicemails, LinkedIn DMs. Some were pleading, others were cold, businesslike. We'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement immediately. But I didn't answer any of them. Because something inside me had shifted. For years, I thought silence was strength. I believed that if I worked hard enough, proved myself consistently enough, someone would eventually notice that my commitment and endurance were currency that would pay off in time. But that was the lie. The truth was, I had let them build a kingdom on my shoulders, and they never once thought to reinforce the foundation. They didn't respect me. They relied on me, used me, leaned on me, until the moment I asked for something in return. Then suddenly, I was too independent. Not a team player. Disposable. The perspective that hit me hardest wasn't that they'd underestimated me. It was that I had underestimated myself. In those weeks after I left, I had time to reflect, something I hadn't allowed myself in years. When you're always putting out fires, there's no time for clarity. But now, with the noise gone, I saw everything clearly. I had built systems that sustained millions of dollars in revenue. I had prevented outages that could have cost clients their contracts. I had created order out of chaos, and they never saw me. They only saw output, not origin. Only results, not the person behind them. And when I stepped away, they didn't know how to rebuild, because they had never learned to value the architect. Only the structure. One afternoon, I got coffee with Lena, an old colleague from HR who'd left a few months before I did. We weren't close, but she had always been kind. She looked at me across the table and said, "We all knew, how much the systems depended on you. But nobody had the guts to say it." I raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" She shrugged. "Culture. Fear. The higher-ups didn't want to admit they'd built a business on one person's invisible labor." She leaned closer. "And you didn't speak up. So they kept pretending everything was fine." That stuck with me. I hadn't spoken up, not really. I'd raised concerns politely, emailed ideas for improvements, asked, quietly, for recognition. But I never demanded space. Never claimed my power. Because somewhere deep down, I had believed that being essential wasn't enough to be valued. And that's when it hit me. I didn't just need to change companies. I needed to change the rules. The collapse of my former employer wasn't some dramatic revenge tale. It was a natural consequence of leadership built on arrogance and inertia. They didn't fail because I left. They failed because they refused to learn how to survive without me. And now, I was free, not just from them, but from the version of myself that accepted being overlooked as a professional norm. I stopped checking the company's social media. I stopped listening to voicemails. I stopped caring whether Elliot stepped down or was fired or walked out in shame. Because that wasn't my story anymore. Instead, I started building something new. I registered a consulting firm. Small, focused. Clients would have to apply. I would choose who I worked with, not the other way around. I named the company, Not a Charity. 3 simple words, a quiet declaration of everything I had learned. My first 2 clients came from referrals. The third? A former client of the company I'd left behind. They called and said, "We want to rebuild from scratch. This time with documentation, transparency, and respect for the people doing the work." I didn't say yes immediately. Because I'd learned that my time was no longer something to be grateful for, it was something to be earned. During one onboarding call, a new client asked, "Why do you charge this much for consulting?" The last guy quoted half. I smiled. "Because I don't just build systems. I build resilience. If I leave tomorrow, you won't collapse. That's part of the price." He paused, then said, "Fair enough." And just like that, I knew I was never going back. One night, months later, I revisited the hallway in my mind, the one where Elliot had laughed at me. Where I stood frozen, cheeks burning, humiliated. But now, when I replayed the scene, it didn't sting. Because now, I saw a woman at the edge of awakening. A woman who thought she was asking for more, but who had no idea that she already was more than enough. I don't hate him. He taught me something no leadership book ever could. If you don't define your worth, someone else will, and they'll always undervalue it. That's the real turning point. Not the crash, not the chaos, not even the calls begging for help. The real shift was internal. The moment I stopped blaming them for not seeing my value, and started demanding that the world meet me on my terms. 3 weeks after I launched Not a Charity, I received an email that made me pause mid-coffee sip. Subject line: "Rebuilding from the ground up. Let's talk." The sender? James Whitmore, CTO at a growing healthcare startup based out of Austin. The name rang a bell, not because I'd worked with him before, but because he'd once been on a panel I watched during a late-night binge of tech conference replays. The body of the email was short, direct, and very different from what I was used to. "We've heard what happened. We're not looking for a miracle. We're looking for someone who understands what makes a system, and a team, sustainable. We'd like to work with you. On your terms." That line stuck with me. On your terms. Because for the first time in my career, I was being approached not as a last resort, not as an underpaid workhorse, not as the girl who knows code, but as a strategist, a leader, a solution. I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I asked for a discovery call. Not a meeting, a screening. This time, I was doing the choosing. On the call, James came prepared. He didn't ask me to prove myself. He already had. He said, "We've built fast, too fast. Now things are held together with chewing gum and hope. What we need isn't just someone who can code, but someone who can see the iceberg before the ship hits it. I asked about documentation. He admitted they had none. I asked about knowledge sharing. He said, "That's what we're trying to fix." But then he said something that changed everything. "We're not just hiring a consultant. We're inviting someone to architect the culture of how we build." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. This wasn't a gig. This was a legacy. 2 weeks later, we signed the contract. It was more than I'd ever made in a year at my old company, triple. In fact, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the agreement we outlined together. I would build their infrastructure with the team. Not for them. Every solution I delivered would be documented, repeatable, and teachable. Every system I created would come with an exit plan that didn't rely on me staying forever. I wouldn't answer messages after 6 p.m. I would choose the tools, define the roadmap, and decide when work was done, not just shippable. In short, I would never again be anyone's safety net. I would be the architect, and I would be treated like one. The first month was intense. Their systems were a digital jungle, patchwork jobs from 4 different contractors. 3 frameworks stitched together, and a C/CD pipeline held together by a half-written bash script. But I didn't panic. I audited, I mapped, I explained. Every time I fixed something, I brought someone into the process, not just to learn the how, but the why. We didn't just rebuild, we restructured. One of the junior engineers, Cam, reminded me of myself. Quiet, hyper-capable, overlooked. In the second week, he pulled me aside and said, "I always thought I had to stay late just to keep up. But now it feels like I can breathe." I told him something I wish someone had told me years ago. If you have to break yourself to keep something running, it was never built right in the first place. He nodded, and from that day forward, he started asking questions louder. That mattered more to me than any pay bump ever had. By the end of the 3rd month, the transformation was real. Systems were stable, scalable, and secure. Documentation wasn't an afterthought, it was part of the process. Leadership started attending sprint reviews to understand, not just judge. And no one expected miracles, because they finally understood how much they cost. More than that, people started staying later, not out of fear, but out of pride. Then one morning, I opened my inbox to find a name I hadn't seen in months. Elliot Graves. The subject line was empty. The message was one sentence. "I see it now. Good for you." There was no attachment, no apology, no plea, just an acknowledgement. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like a shadow finally fading into the background. Because by then, I was already looking forward. That same week, a national conference on systems architecture invited me to speak. Topic: Resilience by design. What happens when the architect leaves? The irony was almost poetic. I stood in front of a room full of CTOs, VPs, senior engineers, and told them the story. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I didn't name names. I didn't shame the company. I told them how neglect isn't just technical, it's cultural. And how you don't build resilient systems by overworking brilliant people. You build them by respecting the human infrastructure as much as the digital one. After the panel, a woman in her late 40s approached me, tears in her eyes. I stayed quiet for too long. Until they forgot I was there. "But your story made me remember, I matter. My work matters." I smiled. Not for her. With her. Because that's what this new opportunity had become. Not just a job. A movement. One where people like me, quiet, technical, essential, finally got to write the rules. Not just follow them. The first time I truly felt the difference in myself was during a client meeting that should have been frustrating. We were halfway through onboarding a new company, fast-growing, overpromising, and totally underprepared. Their team was behind on everything. The product manager kept changing specs. One of the engineers questioned every architectural suggestion I made. And the CTO? He apologized constantly but never actually fixed anything. 6 months ago, this situation would have drained me. I would have worked overtime to save the project, juggled impossible timelines, or worse, absorbed their chaos as my own. But this time? I paused mid-call, looked directly at the screen, and said calmly, "We either slow down and build this correctly, or I walk away. I don't do patchwork anymore." Silence. Then the product manager blinked, nodded, and said, "You're right." And just like that, the room changed. Because I had changed. Boundaries. They weren't walls. They were doors, with locks I controlled. I wasn't rude. I wasn't inflexible. I was clear. And clarity is power. One of the most unexpected parts of this transformation was how much space it created. Mental space. Emotional space. Creative space. For the first time in years, I wasn't working to prove anything. I was building because I wanted to. Because it mattered. Because it aligned with who I was becoming. I started mentoring. Quietly at first. Mostly junior engineers who'd reached out after hearing me speak at the conference. People like I had once been. Overworked. Overlooked. And undervalued. One girl, Jasmine, stood out. She was brilliant. Faster with code than I'd ever been at her age, but hesitant. Always second-guessing herself. Always checking 3 times before speaking up. One night after a mentoring session, she asked, "How did you know when you were good enough?" I smiled and answered honestly. I didn't. I knew when I stopped waiting for someone else to say it. That conversation stayed with her, and with me. Because growth isn't loud. It's not always some dramatic awakening. Sometimes growth is just choosing silence differently. Not to hide, but to own your space without apology. My work changed, too. I began turning down contracts that didn't align with my values, startups who wanted quick and cheap. Companies whose leadership reeked of ego. No matter the money, if they couldn't meet my terms, I passed. I didn't need every client. I only needed the right ones. And they came, slowly, but steadily. Referrals, repeat clients, companies who had heard whispers of what I'd done and wanted a merry system. As one CEO put it, but this time with documentation. I hired 2 people, not employees, but partners. A DevOps lead who used to work at a government agency. And a former cybersecurity consultant who had left big tech to find meaning again. We didn't call ourselves a company. We were a collective, and every line of code we delivered came with 3 things. Redundancy, transparency, respect, not just for the system, but for the people keeping it alive. One afternoon, I found myself rereading my old performance reviews. Words like, quiet, not assertive enough, works hard but doesn't lead. They made me laugh now, not because they weren't true, but because they were only part of the truth. They couldn't see that silence didn't mean weakness. It meant focus. That lack of small talk didn't mean I didn't care. It meant I was too busy keeping the engine running to entertain office politics. That invisibility wasn't a failure. It was how they trained me to survive. But not anymore. People began reaching out, not for help, but for advice. Former colleagues, strangers from LinkedIn, women in tech who had hit the same wall I had, who'd been told to smile more, ask less, be patient. They all asked the same question. How did you get out? And I always answered with this. I stopped trying to be the exception. I started building an environment where people like me didn't have to be. That's what growth looked like. Not a better salary, though that came. Not a fancier title, though that came, too. But the freedom to choose. To walk away. To stay. To charge what I was worth. To teach others to do the same. Sometimes I still think about Elliot, not with resentment, but with clarity. He taught me what happens when leadership confuses loyalty with compliance. When they see reliability as a reason to give less, not more. When they think silence means weakness, and structure means control. He lost everything not because I failed him, but because he refused to listen. And I found myself because I finally did. Now, when I walk into a room, I'm not trying to prove I belong. I know I do. And if I don't, I walk away. Because the biggest growth wasn't in systems or strategy. It was in finally realizing this. If you spend your life holding broken things together, they will never learn how to stand on their own. I don't hold things together anymore. I build things to last, then I let them go. That's not failure. That's freedom. 6 months after launching Not a Charity, I was invited to speak at a national technology summit in San Francisco. The venue was elegant, glass walls overlooking the bay. polished floors that reflected the glow of spotlights, and rows of neatly aligned chairs filled with executives, engineers, founders. I was scheduled to speak last, right after a panel titled, Leading Through Crisis, Building Resilience in Tech Teams. The keynote speaker? Elliot Graves. Yes, that Elliot. His photo was in the printed brochure, tucked under his new title, Turnaround Strategist. Thought leader, executive advisor. I blinked at it for a moment. Not out of shock, but out of irony. He had rebranded. The man who once humiliated me in front of an entire department now stood on stage discussing empathy in leadership and the importance of retaining institutional knowledge. I watched from the back of the ballroom as he delivered his speech. Clean and confident. He never mentioned me. Of course, he didn't. Instead, he used words like, we, our missteps, and the journey. It was polished, measured, professional, but underneath it all, I heard the cracks, the careful dance of a man trying to salvage reputation without confronting truth. Then it was my turn. No music, no slides, just me and a wireless mic. I took the stage slowly, the quiet weight of the room wrapping around me. No preamble, no performance, just this. Sometimes, systems fail not because they were attacked, but because they were ignored. Because the people maintaining them were treated like tools instead of human beings. The room went still. I told them my story, not as a list of accomplishments or grievances, but as a cautionary tale. I spoke of the long nights spent holding things together, of being told to be grateful, of being laughed at for asking for fairness. I spoke of the silence, the burnout, the invisible labor. But more than that, I spoke of what happens when the one holding the foundation finally lets go. It wasn't revenge, I said, it was design. I built systems meant to be understood. If only someone had cared enough to ask. But no one ever did. So when I left, it wasn't sabotage, it was symmetry. People didn't clap right away. There was a long, full silence, the kind that wraps around your spine and lingers. Then came the applause. Not explosive, not performative, just true. It lasted longer than I expected. Afterward, people lined up to speak with me, not about metrics or platforms, but about experiences. A woman with silver streaks in her hair and a laptop tucked under her arm said, I've been in tech 22 years. I thought I was alone. Thank you. A young man in his first year out of college whispered, they tell us to keep our heads down. But maybe that's how they keep us small. And then came a voice I didn't expect. From behind me. You were right. I turned. It was Elliot. His tie was looser now. His smile unsure. I didn't see it, he said. Not then. But I see it now. I nodded once. Politely. I didn't say anything. Because there was nothing left to say. I didn't write a blog post afterward. I didn't tweet a thread or record a podcast. Some stories aren't meant for virality. They're meant for impact. And my impact wasn't in how I'd left, it was in what I'd built after. Not a charity grew, carefully, intentionally. We never took on more clients than we could handle. We never hired in a rush. Every decision was deliberate, because scaling wasn't the goal. Sustainability was. We mentored, we documented, we left trails, not traps. And when a project ended, we handed it off fully, with guides. Guides for the guides. And a human on the other end who felt confident, not abandoned. One day, someone said, you make yourself obsolete in the best way. I laughed. Because yes, that was the point. A year to the day after I walked out of my old office. I revisited that moment in my memory, the hallway, the coffee, the laughter. Only this time, I saw it differently. Not as a breaking point. As a beginning. Because that sentence, do you think I'm running a charity here? Didn't end me. It named me. It named the company I'd build. The story I'd carry. The lesson I'd teach. I am not a charity. I am not invisible. I am not replaceable. I am not a quiet one who should feel lucky to be kept around. I am the blueprint, the system, the structure, and the strategy. And I am no longer giving it away to people who don't see it. That's the real conclusion. Not that I rose, but that I did it without them. And now? I'm not just in control of my systems. I'm in control of my story. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away quietly and let silence speak where words once failed. Mary's journey wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation of her worth, her time, her voice. She learned the hard way that loyalty without respect is just exploitation wearing a polite mask. That working twice as hard doesn't mean people will value you more, especially when they think you're easy to replace. The lesson is clear. If you don't define your value, someone else will, and they'll always aim lower. It's not your job to hold broken systems together with sheer willpower. It's not noble to be invisible. Being reliable should not mean being used. The quietest people in the room are often the ones holding everything together. But even they have a limit. And when they leave, things don't just fall apart. They reveal what was never stable to begin with. If you're in a job where your skills are constantly used but rarely acknowledged, take a breath and take inventory. Document your wins. Record your impact. Set boundaries. Ask yourself, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone know how to keep things running? If the answer is no, that's not job security. That's a warning sign. Start building quietly, for yourself. Update your resume. Start conversations. Explore other paths. You don't need to blow things up. You just need to remember. Your value is not up for negotiation. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.